Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the IDF Forum, Understanding Your Specialty Pharmacy and What's Special About a Specialty Pharmacy. I'm Kathy Antela, Vice President of Education at the Immune Deficiency Foundation, and I will be the MC tonight. On behalf of everybody at IDF, welcome, whether this is the first time you've joined us or whether it is the 100th. We are always glad you are here. So thank you. As always, we have a disclaimer. And even though tonight is not a medical program where we're going to be answering like medical questions, please always note that any information received during our forums that they are intended never to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please always seek the advice of a physician or other qualified healthcare provider with questions concerning a medical condition. IDF's mission is improving the diagnosis and treatment and quality of life of people affected by primary immunodeficiency through fostering a community empowered by advocacy, education, and research. This means that we're committed to serving you and providing you with the tools and resources you need to be your own best advocate and a champion in the PI community. It's by offering these tools and resources that IDF can fulfill its mission of seeking to ensure that everyone in the United States affected by PI has a fully informed understanding of the diagnosis that affects them, all available treatment options for themselves, the expected standard of care, and all of their opportunities for connection and support within the PI community. All of our forums are made possible because of our wonderful sponsors. So we are so thankful to them. And this year, our 2021 sponsors are CSL Behring, Grifols, Takeda, Horizon Therapeutics, Octapharma, Accredo, ADMA Biologics, Bioproducts Laboratory, Farming Healthcare, X4 Pharmaceuticals, Kedrion Biopharma, and Celio Health. So at this time, I am going to introduce Dr. Michael Rigas. Dr. Rigas comes to us with over 38 years of experience working in hospitals and specialty pharmacies. He recently retired and is continuing to volunteer his time by sharing the knowledge he has gained through his career with medical professionals and individuals that rely on infusion therapy. So at this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Rigas. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be here. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to try to get through this in the allotted time. And as I told Kathy earlier today, if it turns out we don't get through it because there's a lot of material, I'm available to have a rescheduled second part if everybody wants and is interested. So I'll let her organize that if there's a need. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit. So as she said, I've been a pharmacist for 40 years. I graduated in 1981 and I went to USC School of Pharmacy and did residency at UC San Francisco. Went into the hospital business as a clinical pharmacist in the hospital for 10 years. And then the next 20 years, I went into home infusion, and that was before specialty pharmacy really existed. And then the last 10 years, I've been doing home infusion and specialty pharmacy together. So at this point, I'm going to focus mainly on IVIG, since that's the most important specialty drug for this group of people, I believe. And at this time, what I'm going to tell you today is based on the last 20 years that I've been involved with IVIG, and I've treated or managed myself or overseen the management of about 20,000 IVIG patients, and that includes infusing about 20 million grams of IVIG into those 20,000 patients over the last 20 years. A lot of 20s, sorry about all that. So anyway, so let's start with the goals for today's talk. I believe that it's important whenever I talk to a new patient or existing patient, I want them to understand several things about IVIG and the complexness of it. The impact of the FDA-approved diagnoses is the first one, and that has to do with what's approved by what insurance companies. Understand the cost of your therapy to the payer. In many cases, IVIG therapy, as we'll see, is about $100,000 a year. That's what the payer sees, and that's why the payer acts the way they do. Understand the cost of therapy to the patient. That is the true out-of-pocket, how much the patient may have to pay. Understand the impact of the IVIG patient's workload on doctor's office. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. Be aware of the impact of multiple IVIG formulations available on the market right now, and how that impacts you as the patient and your doctor. And be aware of the impact of manufacturer shortages and payer formularies that may impact your therapy that you're going to be able to get or is going to be able to be approved for you. So without further ado, let's get going here. So let's talk about what's special about specialty pharmacy. So first is, what's the definition of specialty? And that's why I told you in my career, it didn't really start happening until about 2010 or so for me. And the definition is fairly wide, but the typical understanding is that it's a specialty drug if it requires special purchasing on the part of the pharmacy, special interaction with the patient compared to what you would get at a CVS for an oral medication, special insurance authorization compared to what you normally get at, say, a CVS, special delivery and special administration, that is by a nurse or by the patient in the home if they're getting sub-Q that has to be trained to do it. So anything that fits those categories. And also there's a typical belief that it has to cost more than $600 a month. And most of our immune deficient patients say they're getting, if we just say an average of 30 to 50 grams a month, that's certainly going to beat the $600 a month limit to be considered specialty. So when an infusion actually happens, I think what I'm going to do now that I'm thinking about this, I'm going to jump ahead to another slide here, as I have this slide here. So let's talk about the referral process. So we go to the very beginning here. So if you're in the hospital or you're in a doctor's office or you're in an emergency room and your doctor decides you need IV therapy, you get referred to an infusion pharmacy. If you have a chronic disease, which is where IVIG and primary immune deficiency come in, typically we turn it around in 1 to 2 days. Many patients don't want to start for a month or two. Many patients, this time of the year, they'll say, I want to start after Thanksgiving or I'm going somewhere for the holidays. So as opposed to an acute drug like an IV antibiotic that has to start today. So what we do then is the triage occurs. And the first thing we do is figure out, do you even have insurance? And if you have insurance, does your benefit cover home infusion of your drug as opposed to doctor's office infusion or infusion center in a hospital or outpatient center or in a nursing home or wherever else you may be? And then after that, then is your insurance company going to give us an authorization, either written or verbal, if they're actually going to pay for your prescription, and that they're going to tell us exactly how much your out-of-pocket's going to be. So that leads us to the next box, which is the patient's true out-of-pocket. And in my example, let's just say that your IVIG will make it easy math for me right now. So say it's going to be 50 grams a month and 5 times 9. So it's about $5,000 a month, typically your therapy. And if you have to pay 10%, so you may have to pay $500 a month, and you may not be able to afford that. And therefore, we might need to get a patient assistance plan from the drug maker or some other 501c3 nonprofit organization, or maybe even the pharmacy has their own financial assistance plan. Then we're going to calculate the true out-of-pocket for the life of the prescription. And this is a problem because in my example, if you had to pay $500 a month, that's bad enough, but it isn't the same every month. It's heavily loaded to the first of the year. So you might pay, in this case, say 500 a month is $6,000 a year. You might have to pay $3,000 in the first 2 or 3 months of the year, and then $3,000 spread over the rest of the year. And then just when you think you can do it, then it starts all over again in January, which is coming up soon. Okay, so that may require extensive interaction between the patient and the pharmacy to figure out how, if the patient can afford their out-of-pocket, who can provide assistance. And then we have to choose the drug. And as we know, we'll see in a few minutes, there's probably 15 different drugs to choose from. Some are IV only, some are sub-Q only, and some IV ones can be given IV or sub-Q, but all the sub-Q ones can never be given IV. And then we need to figure out what nursing needs you have. If you're going to be having a nurse come and do every dose, and you have to be trained at the level of a patient and caregiver, or if it's a sub-Q and you're going to be doing it yourself eventually, then you're going to be trained. And then we need to communicate this plan with the patient, make sure we all know how we're going to afford it, when it's going to be delivered, what drug, make sure the patient and doctor know all about it. And then we have to report outcomes at the end of the month, and those typically get reported to the insurance company. They get reported to the doctor and the nursing agency. And then typically in most infusion pharmacies at the end of each month, there's an operations meeting where all the pharmacy people get together and with the nursing and intake and technicians and review all the patients to make sure everything is as planned. And one part I missed over here was the site of care. Most of the time, like 95% or more, it's home, but maybe 2% can be in a doctor's office, infusion center, ambulatory infusion center here, and maybe 0.5% is in a skilled nursing facility, and a very small amount can be other. That could be a hotel, or it could be a car, could be other places that we can't predict what's going to happen. So this is the plight of a patient at the time of first referral all the way to the time when the drug is delivered to the patient's house and the patient's trained and the patient starts therapy. So I wanted to jump ahead and show this overall scheme before I go back to the beginning, where we're going to talk about now more specifics. I guess I should have put these in a different order. But so now, once we obtain the referral, we get the insurance authorization, and then we schedule the patient, ship the med. Most patients need to be reauthorized every 6 to 12 months, where the insurance company wants us to validate you still need it, you're still doing good with labs, you're still getting better, and then refill management is to make sure that we have the refill done in time, so that if the authorization we currently have runs out, we don't want you to go without therapy. So this all has to be handled in a timely fashion. So we talked about the fact that our customer service reps would check your benefits, they would submit the authorization and hope to get a written or oral authorization, and then we would call the patient, as we said, and talk about those other things I just explained. So working through the referral, right now the diagnosis for the patient, typically when the patient goes to the doctor, most PI patients have been sick for a long time, and they've bounced around to various doctors until somebody makes a diagnosis. And in many cases, the physician is trained to pick multiple diagnoses that he or she thinks might be appropriate, and then work through testing and finally come up with a single diagnosis. But however that works, is the physician able to support that diagnosis with laboratory and history, multiple infections, low IG levels, missing school, missing work, all the other lab results that would come, plus pneumococcal vaccine and response to that. And then we would review the physician notes, the lab test, but we would submit that to the insurance company then. And then one of the things we're expert at in this business of specialty pharmacy or specialty infusion is making sure we understand the difference between Blue Cross's insurance policy, what they cover, and between Blue Shield, and between Aetna and Cigna. And then we have to look at other treatment options if there's a lack of benefit or there's contraindications. And we have to highlight the severity of the condition. All these happen to make sure that when we submit this to the insurance company, that we're likely to get an authorization the first time. Overall, probably about 75% of all the authorizations we submit get granted the first time. Then we have to start a denial and appeal that we have to start doing if it's not approved the first time. So working through the referral, we look for the diagnosis, as we said, and over here, these are some approved compendia, and that these are books and other documents that insurance companies use to try and either approve or not approve your IG therapy. So right now, there are more than 200 or 300 different diseases that have been FDA approved for, there have been more than 200 or 300 diseases that IVIG has been used to treat. and there's only about 30 or 40 diseases that are FDA approved. So some insurance companies will look to other diagnoses and other things here, other compendia, to make sure there's information. And one of the ones that we use frequently, and even though it's old now, it basically looks at about 50 different diseases, and it lists whether the IVIG works sometimes on that disease, always in that disease, or never in that disease. And then they try to approve or not approve the therapy based on that. So all these things could come into play with various insurance companies. So the role of the pharmacist, and this is one of the things I like doing the best in my career, is I like to be the quarterback of this team. I like to be the person who organizes the relationship between the doctor, the insurance company, and the patient and the nurse. Also, an appropriate plan of care that has the ability to measure patient progress is achieved. We have to select the brand, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We have to make recommendations if there have been side effects in the past or the patient may be concerned about them, whether we're going to give it IV or sub-Q. And we have to follow up with report to the physician, and we have to coordinate between everybody. And the average PI patient may only get 1, 2, or 3 doses a month, and therefore we typically send a whole month out at a time, and we then coordinate between all the providers. So that's where the sort of quarterback function, as I mentioned, comes in. So the plan of care includes a lot of patient involvement, and that happens during the call with the patient. So we talk about the initial consultation with the patient. We want to make sure the patient knows which disease has been selected and diagnosed from their doctor, any drug information that wants to be shared or the patient wants to know about, how it works, side effects, storage. We have to establish goals, the risk versus benefit, how to keep severity of infections and how to note them when they occur, how to look for increased strength and function of the patient and improve quality of life, and then expectations. Most patients have never had IVIG or sub-Q IG before, so they don't exactly understand how long it's going to take, how's the nurse going to be involved, how frequent, and of course, how's the patient going to be involved. So adverse effects, if we talk about those for a few minutes, most are infusion related, and they look like headache, flu-like symptoms, etc. And we can improve the rate of those occurring by slowing the infusion rate down, ensuring adequate hydration, treating with pre-meds. In some cases, if the route is IV and the reactions are severe, we can switch to sub-Q. In many cases, those acute reactions that occur during the infusion will either get much less or they will be eliminated. And then in some cases, we have to go the other way, where we go backwards, and that is some patients, the sub-Q the skin does not tolerate it. So I've got this listed twice, whether we're going from IV to sub-Q, or some sub-Q patients don't do very well and they need to go back to IV. So the coordination right now is the treatment plan between providers. And there are, like if we got 10 new immune deficient patients this week, every one of them would have a specialized venous access that would have their own individualized infusion rate. They would have customized equipment, a pump, a tubing, IV supplies, catheters, other things like that. The medication storage is typically the same, it needs to be stored in a refrigerator. And obviously every patient has different comorbidities. We need to understand, does the patient have hypertension or migraine headaches? Does the patient have any allergies that we want to avoid making worse? And then finally, many patients have special requests. Like, I don't like this kind of tubing, I'm allergic to this kind of tape, or I want my nurse to come only on the weekend, or I want my nurse to only be a man or a woman, or I want only when my husband's at work, or when my husband's home, or when my kid's in school. So there could be various variations of these special requests that could be product or timing or other things specific. So if we look now, we're going to switch to actual more clinical. So I'm trying to give a little bit of an idea about what occurs in the pharmacy and how a patient started. Now we have to talk about the pharmacoeconomics of all this. So imagine that the patient is in the center of a very complex situation. And let me see if I have a slide for that. I'm not sure if I included in this deck or not. Yes, okay, so here it is. All right, so right now, the patient is in the middle of what I'm going to call the pharmacoregulatory storm. And so imagine if you're the patient, you have the federal government with Medicare, et cetera, having some impact on you. You have the state government who manages Medicaid and the Board of Pharmacy and Department of Health, which is where the nurses are licensed. You have the manufacturer who is manufacturing a product that has a lifestyle, that has financial goals, and they also are very heavily controlled by the FDA, what they can say about certain diseases based on their FDA-approved indications. And the insurance company, it wants to increase its return on investment, so it doesn't want to pay for anything for you at all, because whatever it pays, that means it's spending money. So the insurance company can be quite complex to deal with because of authorizations. And then, of course, you're the patient. You don't want to spend any money because you think the out-of-pocket is going to be too high. You want things fast. You want to make sure you get everything you're supposed to be getting to make sure your therapy goes good. And the problem here with details, there's so many things happening at the start of therapy, you're not able to pay enough attention to everything at once. So it may take a long time for the patient to be understanding all these other groups that have some impact on them. And that is lack of awareness regarding the system, which you're now in the middle of. And then finally, the ability to afford your out-of-pocket. So the patient is very important in all this, of course, because you are the patient. And it's very difficult to just all of a sudden be thrown into the middle of high-cost biologic therapy like IVIG or sub-QIG when all these people have something to do with it. And of course, the pharmacy industry, we're part of the problem because we only do IV or oral, or we're in the hospital, and we're always trying to get the right drug, the right dose, at the right time, and the right patient. And there's a lot of coordinating. And the physician, of course, the physician is busy. Okay, there's a lot of hassle with the insurance company getting authorizations. There is some legal exposure. There's many sales reps calling on the doctor every week, trying to make sure they know about the drugs and the various companies. Okay, and some physicians may only set up 5 or 10 new IVIG patients a month. So they may not be that used to how to do everything, how to get it going fast and easiest. And then finally, if you're involved with a hospital, I don't have to talk about that. There's all these things. So the patient is stuck in the middle. And when I'm working either as a consultant or as a volunteer right now, helping various organizations, when people call me and say, we need help, we can't get our therapy authorized, we don't know what to do, I feel this is where my skill is the best. I help the patient in the middle of all this to understand all these various people who are trying to impact the patient. In many cases, the impact they're going to have is to benefit themselves at the expense of the patient. And therefore, it's a valiant battle that I and our specialty pharmacy business are involved in. So let me go back up to where I left off now. And now let's talk about what's FDA approved. So when you're a company and you want to get your IVIG on the market, you have to get FDA approval for one disease. And that disease could be the one that you are very excited about. It could be one that you think is the easiest to get, or it could be the one that's the least expensive to get. And so however it is, this is the list of what is currently approved by the FDA. So there's about 25 or 26 in primary immune deficient approved diagnoses. There is several other ones you can see. Immune thrombocytic purpura is a disease of platelets, leukemia, bone marrow, HIV kids, Kawasaki, CIDP, and multifocal motor neuropathy. So if you don't have one of these diseases, then FDA is not approved IVIG for that. And as we'll see in a minute, the insurance company may use that as a tactic. And it may also have impact on the drug company and several other things, even though that's not what the FDA's intention was to begin with. So let's talk for a minute about the process dynamics. So it takes a long time to make IVIG or sub-QIG. It takes about a year from the time it is first drawn. So it's collected part of the plasma. It's either paid to donate or it's voluntarily donated, and the supply is always constrained, especially in 2021 right now. We saw what happened in 2020. A lot of people were afraid to donate because they thought they would get COVID. And so there was a 25 or 30% decrease in the number of blood donations, whether they were paid or voluntary in 2020. So right now we're not seeing any shortages, but we think that it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see what happens by, say, another 6 to 12 or 18 months from now. So right now, another interesting thing in America, if you're going to sell IVIG, the plasma has to come from America. You can't get plasma from China or India. It has to come from America. So that also makes it more difficult, especially a couple of the companies will send the plasma over to another country to process it and then bring it back to America. So that adds complexity. And if you think about a liter of plasma, and I know that we're all reeling about the high cost of gasoline right now, but if you think about it as a barrel of oil, IVIG comes from plasma, albumin, hemophilia, if you have a bleeding disease, that comes, and lots of other specialized biologicals. So it's very complex for the drug company to take the plasma, make IVIG and everything else, and how they handle it, whether think about oil, whether it's jet fuel, gasoline, kerosene, bunker fuel, whatever, they all have their own uses. And so each of these uses for the plasma, including IVIG, is all very different. So it's one thing I think is important is for the patient that needs IVIG or sub-Q to understand where they fit in. It's not like getting a medication for blood pressure or diabetes. This is a very complex, from the start of the plasma donation until the time the drug is ready to give you, plus the insurance company, plus the prescribing, plus the authorization. It's a very complex situation. So I'm gonna stop here and zoom to another screen. This is a list. This comes from MHA, which is Managed Health Associates, and every year in October they make an updated list. And let me get rid of this. And so this list shows all the drugs available in the country right now, and you can see several of them: GammaGuard Liquid, GammaKed, GammaPlex. It tells you what FDA approved indications are. And as we said, this is important to what gets approved by the insurance company. And in some cases, the drug is approved for primary immune deficiency and multifocal motor neuropathy, or PI, ITP, and CIDP, which is this is the disease of platelets, and this is a neuromuscular disease. And some, because of the strategy of the company, are only approved for one or more things. Some are approved for several. And there's several issues about how much IgA, the osmolality. So we're not going to talk about these things right now. I'll be happy to answer questions if anyone wants to know what's important about this. But the thing that's important is these are all, just if you went to buy a new car and you said, how many horsepower, does it have a stereo, what kind of engine does it have, can it go off-road, can it go on the highway, all those things. This is basically, if you think about a car analogy, these are the particulars of each drug. It tells you how come it is safe and you don't get a virus like COVID or AIDS or mad cow disease, is because each company does one or more, several processes to make sure it doesn't contain any virus. And then whether it can be given sub-Q or IV only or both. And then of course the dose. So this list includes, those are all the 10% products. These are the 5% and products that are still powders, of which there's only one powder left. And then finally, if we come down here, this is the sub-Q products, and that's where Cuvitru, Cutiquig, Hizentra, and Zembify, as we talked about before, are only sub-Q. And then we have these few products, GammaGuard Liquid, GammaKed, and GammaNex-C, that can be given IV or sub-Q. But these are 10% only, and everything else is 20%, except for Cutiquig is 16.5%, and that has to do with how much fluid there is in it. And then over here, you can see IQVIA is a combination product of really GammaGuard Liquid and hyaluronidase together. So this, I have given a lecture just on this chart, and I stopped at 2 hours when people were asking questions about how to interpret the chart and what does it mean to me as the patient or the doctor. So I want you to know it exists, and I'm going to make it available to Kathy so that anybody on this call that wants to see this and have it, so as they move through their therapy, maybe they started on IQVIA and they got changed to Zembify or vice versa, this would be an important list to have so you can understand and maybe ask questions of your pharmacist about the actual drug you're getting. So if we go back to the presentation, now let's talk about IVIG and sub-Q IG and drug administration issues. So now that we've got an insurance authorization, we have the drug, we have everything. Now, where are we going to give it? Are we going to give it in a hospital inpatient, which is not very often? A hospital outpatient happens frequently. A doctor's office happens frequently. The patient home is the most frequent, or some other kind of ambulatory infusion center that is not a doctor's office or hospital. And each insurance company has a plan where they like this, one of these more than the other because they think they're saving money or controlling costs, as well as they want you to make sure that you have the clinical need to be in whatever site. So if you are stable and could be taught, they want you to be at home. If you're not stable and maybe your doctor wants to see to make sure how you do with your first several doses, you might start in the doctor's office here, and then if everything's okay after the first few doses, then transfer to home. And then there are several reimbursement and regulatory requirements on the site of care based on what kind of insurance you have. For example, Medicare and Medicaid, Medi-Cal in California, they have rules about which diseases can be reimbursed at home setting versus some other setting, as well as which kind of pharmacy can do it in which setting. So it can be quite complex. Then we have the IV versus sub-Q, and most immune deficient patients and most immunologists and other doctors ordering therapy for immune deficient patients, they're starting off with the sub-Q route because the patient can be more self-directed and can infuse wherever they want, whenever they want. IV is more common for other diseases like the neuromuscular diseases, but we have patients with neuromuscular getting sub-Q, and we have them with immune deficient getting IV. So it all depends on the patient's skin integrity, the patient's ability and interest and desire to inject themselves, as well as potential side effects. As well as there is, speaking of side effects, first dose is typically when most of the side effects occur, and many companies either have policies they won't do a first dose at home or they will do a first dose at home if you meet the requirements. So the first dose, just when the patient thinks they've been diagnosed and the insurance has approved everything, when they're ready to start therapy, then the first dose, we have to get through it, and that may require some kind of transfer between doctor's office or hospital outpatient and home eventually if the first doses go good. Then the pumps are required. There can be more than 10 kind of pumps by the time you think about all the IV pumps and the sub-Q pumps, and then possible IV access devices for specific patient drug disease combination. Those are infinite, and they're customized for every patient. So one patient may need certain size needles. One patient may want certain kind of tubing only. One patient might want to be ambulatory while they're getting infused, and the other one might want to be more sedentary. So all these things are customized for every patient. And if you start off one way and don't like it, we can change you to something else as we get used to, and you get used to what you like and don't like. So I think this is a good place to stop, Kathy. When we pick up again, if we start doing a second lecture, which I think we're going to need because we've only gotten through half of the whole second half, has to do with the pharmacoeconomics of it. That is, how come the cost of it is so important and so problematic? And here, I'll just stop after this slide. I'll say many of these factors have led pharmacists, physicians, and hospitals and payers to be wary of IV, IG, and sub-Q. This has resulted in development of a myriad of programs and tactics to minimize IVIG use and mitigate cost. That was like patient out-of-pocket cost and authorization. They want to make sure you really need it, but so they don't have to pay for it. And then these programs typically are not patient-centric, as we just saw in this slide here, the patient's in the middle. And many of these groups are supposed to protect the patient and help the patient, but some of the groups, their best interest may be not the same as the patient. So it can be quite complex. So I think if anybody's interested in the second half, or if the questions want to come up, I think the important thing that we're missing right now is understanding how does it get paid for, what are the impact on patients and doctors and families.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rigas. Wonderful information. And yes, I do think that we need a part 2. So definitely. All right. So thank you so much. That was great information. Okay. Well, we are just moving right on here to the Q&A session. And my colleague, Colleen Brock, is going to take over and ask all the questions you have submitted, and take it away, Colleen.
Good evening, everybody. So as Kathy said, I'm Colleen Brock. I am Manager of Medical Programs here at IDF, and I am glad to see everyone here. And I am so glad for the information that Dr. Rigas has provided so far this evening. You are a wealth of information that we need to know about. So we have some questions, and we'll see if we can get through all of them. The biggest one, I think, that we're seeing a lot at IDF, and somebody asked tonight, is about antibodies for COVID in infusions. And the question is not whether or not antibodies are in infusions, because we know they are. We just know at this point they're not protective yet, but we know there are antibodies in there. But if antibodies only last in a person, say 6 to 8 months, which is why boosters are now being recommended, and if it takes a year to make the product and get it out to the patients, how are we ever going to have sufficient antibodies in infusions to be protected from our infusions? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, we said earlier, it takes about a year to make IVIG. So the first time ever that batches of IVIG could even show up that would have any COVID antibodies of somebody who survived COVID and donated blood would be around March of 2021, or so say summer 2021, which just happened. So now, before COVID, if you look on the package insert for a given brand of IVIG, it will give you some of the antibody titers, like for mumps and measles and staph and strep and things like that. But we've never seen anybody report out to the public yet what the COVID antibody titer is, and could be highly variable by batch. Each batch of IVIG, each lot of IVIG may be between 10 and 20,000 patients donated to make that batch. So many of them are going to have been exposed to COVID. Some got a COVID vaccine, and therefore they have an antibody to the surface protein, and some actually had COVID. They have an antibody to the actual bacteria. So we were worried that there'd be a run on IVIG, that people would want to use it, and they'd want to ask which one had the most COVID antibody titer in it. But so far, we've been surprised there has not been a run on IVIG, to our knowledge, at our company, people trying to use it just for that purpose. And eventually, so my guess is that probably by the end of this year, say March of 2023 or 2024, that'll be like 3 years since COVID happened the first time, we may be seeing more understandable information of what's in the IVIG. But at this point, using it to treat COVID is not exactly where anybody's mind is at, I don't think. Like right now, we give IVIG to immune deficient patients to replace what they don't have or replace what they have that doesn't function right. And we give them anti-strep, all the other things we said. But right now, by the time that there's widely known what's in it and it's available and has a consistent titer, then I think we're going to be vaccinated and or have oral medication or both So it may not be that important to see what's in it. But I think a lot of PI patients are asking that question. And last time I looked, within about a month ago, I did not see definitive answers that could answer this question any better than I just did.
Thank you. It is a tough question. There is also a lot of chatter about the dates that are on our products. So people understand that a product can sit on a shelf in the warehouse to be shipped out for a maximum of 3 years. I don't know of any product that lasts that long because it's in such high demand. But they're looking at the expiration date and they're worried that it's from a donation that was 3 years ago. And
yeah, so can you let me share my screen?
Yeah.
So if we look at this document here, so you can see here the storage and shelf life. And I'm not going to, you can see what drug they are, but most of them, the typical thing is under refrigeration, it's good for 36 months. And under room temperature, typically anywhere from 6 to 36 months, depending on the room temperature of the product. So typically I tell patients good for a year at room temperature in the manufacturer's bottle and good for 3 years in refrigeration in the manufacturer's bottle. So the answer to the question is that with or without COVID, that most companies use the IVIG within 2 or 3 months when they get it. So like if we ordered a batch of IVIG today, say we got in 10,000 grams of IVIG today, they would at least be dated at least a year. We would send it back if it wasn't a year. And then typically they would be 2 to 3 years dating in the refrigerator. And then based on the size and shape and drug, like you can see if we're looking at Gammagar liquid here, it comes as 1, 2.5, 5, 10, and 20, and 30 gram bottles. Based on that, we would typically, most companies would use up the IVIG and send it to the patient's house within 6 months of receiving it, or even less, 2 months or 3 months, and the patient would infuse it well before any of the 36 months, well before even 2 years had expired, and for its room temperature, well before 1 year had expired. So, and if your pharmacy does mix it in a bag, in many cases we mix it in a custom bag, like if you needed 55 grams, and we didn't want to give you, in this case, like a 30 and a 20 and a 5, we might put that all in the same bag and do it in our clean hood in our sterile laboratory. And that we would only give a 14-day in refrigerator temperature because it's now been altered. So I'm not sure if that answers the exact question, Kathy. Sorry, I was thinking about Kathy. Colleen, if that answers the question. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's where somebody, like when we get our product and it expires May of 25, they're thinking that this product now has been sitting somewhere for a period of time. Or if it says it expires in 2022, it's from 3 years ago before COVID hit. So it's not going to help me at all. And I'm like you, I don't know of any product company whose product is sitting on the shelf for even more than a year at this point.
Well, so let me answer it in a couple of different ways. So in order for one of our specialty pharmacies to be licensed and to be able to bill all those insurance companies, it has to be accredited, and accredited by Joint Commission or Accreditation Commission for Home Care, which is ACHC, or by URAC or by some other groups. And you have to have either one or two of those accreditations. And in the pharmacy world, that has a lot to do with the storage, the fact that we only take drugs, like say I got a delivery of 10,000 grams today, in my pharmacy, I have processed this just to make sure it came directly from the wholesaler to me. It did not sit on a truck in Louisiana in hot temperature for a week. It did not get frozen somewhere for a week. So I have a mechanism of tracking exactly how it got to me and exactly all from the time it was made and made available to be distributed to the time I got it. I can track the whole time through. And if I don't like what I see, I don't believe it's accurate, I don't believe it's been stored right, I'm going to reject it. So on the pharmacy end, that is the way the law works and the way accreditation works. On the drug wholesaler end, they have their same regulations as well. They know they have to store at an appropriate temperature. They have to prove to various accrediting bodies and inspection bodies that come to them that they have stored it appropriately during the time period. So if you got something today, let's say I got a bottle and I delivered it to a patient's house today, and it said the expiration date was July of 2021, okay, which is, July 2022, that is about, 8-9 months left on its shelf life. And a lot of patients don't understand what the shelf life and expiration date mean.
Correct.
And it's hard for me to explain. If you were in my pharmacy and we were live, I could draw it on the board for you. But if you imagine that the IVIG is shaped like a Y, and the top of it is the specific part that binds to various things, and the bottom of the Y is the general part that does not bind to specific things, though each one of those Y molecules is a monomer that's supposed to be by itself. And if it gets too old, several of them stick together and they make dimers, which means two of them are stuck together. And the rule, like if FDA grants my company, say GammaGuard Liquid here, if they say it's stable for up to 36 months in refrigeration, that means the FDA has studied their manufacturing process, and at the time of 36 months, there's still more than 95% monomer in the IVIG product or sub-Q IG product, and only up to 5% of the dimer. And the dimer is either not effective or much less effective than the monomer. So the patient can be confident if he or she is using a FDA-approved product, which is all there is in America. They can be confident if they're using a pharmacy like any of the ones, like we talked about, Accredo, Kava Fusion, Quorum, any other ones that are part of the sponsors of IDF. They're all multiply accredited, and they get surveyed every couple of years or every year, depending on who's coming and who's surveying, to make sure that they understand how they order, how they supply, how they store it, at what temperature. So right now, the patient should be very comfortable that even if it had 6 months left on it and you're going to use it by next week, you need not be worried because it's been stored properly. And even then, as currently, we're not using IVIG necessarily to treat anybody for COVID, and we're not looking for COVID antibodies typically. But in an immune deficient patient, if you can't respond to the vaccine either at all or not appropriately, your doctor may be looking for COVID antibodies to be in there. And therefore, if you think about it, and we've had some patients call up and ask that they don't want anything, if you do the math, anything that was made earlier, say, than March of 2019, that took until March of 2020 to come out to be useful, and therefore with a 3-year shelf life. So anything has a shelf life of 2020 plus, well, actually March of 2020. So I got the years wrong. So it came out. So it came out in March of 2021 plus 3 is 2024. So anything that has something less than 2024, like 2023 or 2022 or 2021, you can get an idea of whether the COVID started being available as far as antibodies and the plasma donated. That couldn't possibly happen until March of 2020. So if anybody's interested in talking about this more, I'm available. I can coordinate with Kathy or Colleen to discuss it in more detail. But you probably should be talking with your doctor about if you're not able to make, like right now, if you've got a pneumococcal vaccine and your response was bad and not efficient and not enough as your doctor wanted, then that may indicate that your doctor may be interested in having COVID antibodies from IVIG to help you. But you need to talk about that because that is a very new science right now, and there's not a lot known about the various batches. Like if you look at various batches for pneumonia, like staph and strep or mumps, measles, or rubella, the titer of those antibodies is very consistent batch to batch, year to year. But because COVID is so new right now, I don't think anybody knows what the titer is for each batch and how consistent it is from batch to batch. I've not seen that data yet. So I think if a doctor called me and wanted me to help him with that or help her with that, then I would be calling the drug company to find out. And maybe they'll tell us, maybe they won't, because they may not have enough to be statistically significant yet. So,
and I think you're correct in that. I think with all the information IDF is getting, it boils down to statistically we don't know yet. Especially, we cannot assume any product is protective because we don't know the protective level for anybody yet. So there's still a lot to come. But thank you for kind of explaining that.
I did have one discussion with one doctor about one patient a few months ago about getting the COVID antibody titer in the blood after they got their IVIG. And I don't know what the answer to that was, whether anybody paid for it to be done, the insurance company, whether they actually did it. But there was discussion about doing that, but I think the idea might be that the titer would be so low, it would not be measurable. But I still think that's an option that somebody's going to try, and we don't know what's going to happen yet.
Yes, I agree. I think that in the future is going to tell us a lot more. So moving on, are the pharmaceutical companies providing the specialty pharmacies with information about the antibodies, or is that something that you're just waiting to hear? So, I mean, you said about a patient calling and asking for a product with an expiration date beyond, XYZ. Are you guys even told as specialty pharmacies what the status is of COVID antibodies?
So right now, before COVID, as I said, each lot number, we actually get a list of what's in it, and the package insert, the average amount of mumps, measles, rubella, et cetera. No package insert I've seen so far includes the titer for COVID antibody. And the last time when we called up and asked about the COVID antibody, what the titer was, they couldn't tell us, because the average antibody titer batch to batch takes years to make an average. Now I have called various companies in the past, and one time I was asked about a antibody toward a product, patients have autoimmune blistering disease, pemphigus and pemphigoid. There's a certain antibody we're looking for, as well as sometimes we look for certain low levels of antibodies that would attack the red blood cells. And so we have gotten specific information from some companies who've told us which lot or batch we should be looking for that has a specific high concentration of a certain antibody or a specific low concentration, but to my knowledge, never for COVID yet.
Okay, thank you. How is a person notified if there is a recall on a lot number? And is that medication replaced then if you have a bad batch for free, or do you get charged twice?
Well, let me tell you about that. So last year, our company received a huge amount of a certain batch. We got more than like 80% of a certain batch, and we distributed to all of our pharmacies across the country. And within a few months, we saw a signal coming to us that there was an extra amount of rashes coming. I won't name the product, I won't name anything, I'll just tell you it happened. So when we saw that signal, and that's kind of like a term, we called the company and we told them we think there's a problem with this batch, and we sent them all the patient data, de-identified, and within a week or two, after intense work on our part and their part, there was a nationwide recall of that batch. So at that time, we called all the patients that got that batch. And in this case, this extra rash that we talked about, only about 10 patients got it, and maybe 100 patients got that batch, and the other 90 didn't have a rash. So we looked in our computer to see how many patients got that batch, and we looked to see how long ago it was, whether those patients still had the batch in their possession or not and hadn't infused it, or they'd already infused it. So then the next thing we did is called the doctors who had those patients and let them know that this happened, the patient got that batch. We let them know that there was or wasn't any extra reaction. We let them know how it was treated. We let them know if it was still in the house that we retrieved it. And then we also let the patient know after, let the doctor know, and made sure that if the batch could be retrieved, it could be. And then we took it back and gave the patient a different batch, or in some cases, the patient demanded a different drug. Okay. And so there is an FDA-approved recall process. Every pharmacy knows what it is because that's part of the accreditation process. And it means you have to find who got it, find out if it's still in the house, find out if they already infused it, how they did, which you already know how they did because it already happened, and then follow through with returning it to the manufacturer, sending new batch to the patient, and then eventually closing the whole thing out after it was done. So that's a high-level view of how we handle a recall. And that particular one, we actually were the ones who instigated the recall, where most of the time we get notified from email from the Board of Pharmacy or from a drug manufacturer that there's been a recall. So we typically don't know how the recall happened, but this time we actually were instrumental in causing the recall to happen.
Thank you for your diligence there. And IDF also sends out alerts when we get notices of recalls. And there is a website that you can sign up for that you can get recall information. So moving on, how do specialty pharmacies, how do you find a specialty pharmacy, when your insurance doesn't cover the previous one you've been on, and now they cover some that are closed and not working, they don't have people anymore due to COVID. What do you do?
You mean the specialty pharmacy is closed and out of business? Okay. So most common is two things that, let's say you come in, remember I showed you the chart, the doctor decides you need IV or sub-QIG. Most commonly that physician has a relationship with a specialty pharmacy. So either he likes Mike and my company, or he likes Betty and her company. Somehow he has a relationship with them. He already has, or she, the doctor, maybe he or she, they already have a relationship. They already know they like the product, they like the service, they like the follow through. So more than 50% of the time, maybe 80% of the time, the physician is directing the referral to the pharmacy. On the other times when that doesn't happen, a physician may not know which pharmacy they want to use or may be unaware. Typically, they would call the insurance company, and the insurance company would say, okay, based on the patient's insurance, they have the choice of these three specialty pharmacies, or only this one specialty pharmacy, whether it's HMO or PPO insurance or Medicare or Medicaid. That would have to be find out which one goes with the insurance. And then finally, if the insurance isn't directing and the doctor's not directing, then that's a very rare case, hardly ever happens. There are some cases where the patient has a friend that has a specialty pharmacy that they like, and that patient wants to go to the same place as their friend. So sometimes that can work. Sometimes the insurance company will say, okay, that's one of the ones we approve. Or sometimes they'll say, no, we're not going to approve that, or we'll approve it, but you have to pay a lot more out of pocket if you don't want one of our dedicated pharmacies are already authorized. So most often the doctor knows where they want to send it. The second most common is the insurance company tells where to send it. And if the company's gone out of business, and I'm not aware of that many going out of business in the last year, but there's one other thing is that sometimes the drug is only available from certain pharmacies, like a new drug may come out, and it doesn't really happen with IVIG so much, but with other specialty drugs, it may only be 2 pharmacies in the country have access to it, like the drug Xolair, for example, which is for asthma. That one is still primarily distributed by Walgreens, and they've had pretty much a lock on that since it came out, and maybe loosening up this year. Since I've been retired, I haven't paid attention to that drug, but there's a few drugs that have a limited distribution and only certain pharmacies can get them. So if you have a problem, and one of the things I want to make available, and I hope I'm not opening the floodgates here, but as a person who wants to help IDF, if a patient calls IDF and if Colleen or Kathy want to have me help, I'd be happy to help figure out what the problem is, whether there's authorization issues or the availability issues, especially if it has to do with IVIG. So
thank you. That's awesome. So as a patient, is there an easier way to make sure that they get the right equipment that they need when they send the wrong stuff? So they're asking, how do we make sure that we get the right needles, the right flow valves, the right spikes, all of it, especially when they're frustrated because they keep getting sent the wrong stuff instead of the stuff they keep asking for? Who do they work with?
So back in the day, before when I first started way back in like 1991, things were a lot different. And so in many cases, in my first couple of pharmacies that I ran for Option Care and other companies, we would provide basically a giant box. It could be cardboard, it could be plastic. It would have cubicles in it. Maybe it would be like 2 feet by 2 feet and have 4-inch by 4-inch cubicles in the box, and have either an open top, almost like a tackle box. And we would give the person, when we send them their supplies and tubing and needles, we'd ask them to take it out of the box and put it into the tackle box and put it in the right place. Okay, now some things are too big to fit in there, but you can get the idea. And that makes it very easy for the patient to say, not only do I not have enough of my sub-Q needle, I'm running low on those, but I don't have this tape, I don't have this, or what you sent me isn't the same as I got last time, so I can make a call right away. So the patient can make a call right away to the pharmacy and say, this is not what I thought I was getting. So in the pharmacy, we have thousands of items. And as I mentioned earlier, one patient may have a certain needle, certain syringe, tubing, tape, hand sanitizer, all that stuff. The next patient could be different. So everything is customized. And sometimes what the patient wants may be because their best friend has it, or maybe they saw it on TV, or the nurse said they have it. In some cases, the nurse doesn't work for the pharmacy. Some cases, the pharmacy doesn't have its own nursing and has outside nursing. So that nurse may work for other organizations. That nurse may tell the patient, gee, I really like this tubing or I like this tape. But that pharmacy that the patient is being supplied from may be unaware of what the nurse says and may not stock those things. So in the slide I showed with the patient welcome call, that is the first time that the patient and the pharmacy team are going to get together. And that's where we're asking, have you had IVIG before? Do you have any allergies? Do you have any special requests? What kind of nurse you want, what day of the week, whatever. And even if you say whatever you want, then it may be that changes. Maybe you're allergic to the tape you got. Maybe you never had tape before like that. So I think it's up to the patient in some way and up to the pharmacy. I don't think the patient can be comfortable enough that they just put the box on the shelf and never look at it until the day they want to use it. That just, I've been doing this for 30 years and, I've been associated with several companies, and there's always somebody who wants something that doesn't come the right way. And so I think a lot of times the delivery person or maybe FedEx Express is going to deliver it and comes to the house. The first thing the patient do is open it, take everything out, make sure what's in there, call immediately if you don't like what's in there or something's missing. But also I think there's a patient responsibility to make sure that they have what they know what they have in their house. They know we're about to run out of something. So you can't just be dependent on the pharmacy and everything. The patient has to be part of the therapy. And way back to the slide where I showed the care plan, that's part of the care plan. So if you're going to get better, you're going to get better fast and stay better, then you got to be aware of what's coming and you have to advocate for yourself. And then you also need to be aware that you may want special tubing or special tape that your best friend told you about. That special tubing or special tape may cost 10 times more than normal, and that may cause the pharmacy to not normally stock it or not think it's necessary. So a lot of patients will demand something like, I have to have this tape or this thing, this tubing, and most cases the pharmacy can get it and arrange for it. But in some cases, that the product is so expensive or so unavailable that it makes it difficult for the pharmacy to stock it. And therefore there may be conversation between the pharmacy and the patient. Do you really need this? Why do you need it? Here's what I have. Can we try this? although it may not be available, it may be short. Right now with supply and demand, there's a lot of things that aren't where they're supposed to be. So the flexibility and diligence on the part of the patient is important to make sure they know what they got and call back immediately if it's not what they wanted.
And that's very true. And with the supply chain issues that we're having, do you foresee issues with getting syringes and tape and things like that?
My experience so far has been no, but I'm thinking that it's still yet to come. Okay, and I think, and this sounds bad, but I'm sorry about to say this, but we have too many variables. We don't need, right now we're a country of excess where every company who wants to make a new tubing or syringe or whatever can, and then if it passes and gets approved, it can be purchased. So we may see a new future after COVID where it says this is all the things we're going to stock, and we're not going to get any more until the supply comes back. So it could be a new future we haven't seen before. Like I was in the store yesterday looking for a certain kind of cereal, and I was shocked to see 50 feet of cereal or 100 feet of cereal, thinking, do we really need 100 feet of cereal on the shelf at Vaughn's? And that's a bad example, but you get the idea. We don't, as long as the tubing, the pump, the syringe, the tape, as long as it works, that's the minimum criteria. Now, if there's something special about it, it may not be available because not everything is going to be in the right place at the right time at the right cost.
Well, I really appreciate your answers. You have been extremely helpful. We do have some questions about copay accumulators and copay assistance, but I think, as Kathy said, we'll schedule a second one that we can address those kinds of issues. And like you had said earlier, kind of getting into the nitty-gritty. But I appreciate all the questions that people sent in, encourage you to keep sending them. And I look forward to working with you and helping everybody, and wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And I'm going to pass it over to Kathy now.
Well, thank you. And at this time, we would like to thank all of tonight's featured sponsors: CSL Behring, Takeda, Octapharma, Accredo, Farming, and Kedrion. Thank you. Thank you for support. Wonderful to hear from you tonight. So thank you for being here. And at this time, thank you. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to our wonderful presenter who shared some great information with us. And we look forward to seeing you December 7th when we talk about COVID, and then for 2 more Zebra Strong series, December 9th and December 16th. So thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for everything you do. Take care and see you next time.